Focusing is a very powerful approach to understanding yourself, understanding others, and helping yourself while helping others. It is something that's very intensely personal, emotional. It's not, say, the same as if you were taking a class on how to repaint your walls or how to learn accounting or how to do carpentry. It's very connected to who you are. And so in this course, where you're going to be learning how to do focusing, you cannot really learn that effectively unless you also apply it at the same time to who you are and to, little by little, notice that you're making changes in your life. So as you take the course, we're going to be very careful to notice how it helps you understand better some things in your life that you have difficulty with, or dig a little deeper. It does not have to be issues. If it is issues, it could be issues about relationships, issues about work, issues about not knowing whether or not to make some changes in your life, issues about, say, exercising versus not exercising, overeating, things like that. But it doesn't have to be issues. It could simply be that you might say, oh, I'm generally happy with my life. I want to see if there's a way that, I can be a little happier. So anything that you decide to focus on that's important to you is part of what this learning is. Focusing came about when Eugene Gendlin noticed that people who got a lot out of therapy were people who were taking little pauses and allowing for the possibility of an aha moment. And so before building up any complex notions about what focusing is or how to do it a little better, the first single most important thing is to give yourself the opportunity to take pauses and, more generally, to slow down. So I'm inviting you to think about your way of speaking, your way of interacting with people, to think of it in terms of rhythm. Usually, when we think of thoughts or we think of interactions, we think of it in terms of the content, the ideas, the words. And of course, they are important. But think also about the music behind the words, not just the lyrics. And the rhythm is the rhythm of your conversations or the rhythm of your thinking. Like a train that's chuck, 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 chuck. Okay? And think of it more as a rhythm of ah, ah. Okay? So that's if you think about your own rhythm. If you think of conversations, if the rhythm of the conversations is something like da 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 da, and the other person go, yeah, baby, baby, and ah, bah, 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 like two trains going toward each other. And think about it as, or another way in which it sometimes happens is, yeah, and but, and so there is kind of a more adversarial role here. And think about the rhythm of conversation as something that's more like da 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 da, yeah, and that sense of yeah, what's it like when there is a sense of space, okay? So before you do anything more about focusing, pay attention to slowing down and pausing. And pausing does not mean pausing for half an hour. No, it can be 5 seconds. It could be just a little bit of an interruption, so that essentially people who are watching you would not say, oh, this person is pausing. It just says this person is being very thoughtful. Okay? So slowing down and pausing. It is possible to focus on your own, but there's a lot to be gained by doing it in partnership. And before maybe elaborating on what it is that focusing is, I want to invite you to start with simply having active listening in your conversations. So I'm going to be describing it, and to say that this is something that you can easily do. You're going to practice this between this class and the next one. And whenever you're not quite sure about focusing, you can always revert to active listening. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a great platform. Everything on top of it is icing on the cake. So what is active listening? Well, if you remember the previous video when I talked about the rhythm, active listening is actually a way in which you create this rhythm in a conversation. So part of the rhythm is that you take turns. There's one person who talks and one person who listens. You do that for, say, 10 minutes. So you say we're going to have a partnership of active listening for 10 minutes each or 15 minutes each. And so the first 15 minutes, person A speaks and person B is the listener. The next 15 minutes, person B speaks and person A is the listener. When you're the speaker, you remember what we said before. You kind of slow down a bit, you know, the try to slow down if you remember it. Take little pauses. And from time to time, what the listener is going to do is to summarize what you have said. So there's a bit of a dance. You know, it's possible that sometimes you speak a long time and there's a lot for the listener to summarize. Okay? But it's okay, because the listener doesn't have to give you an exact summary of what you said. As a listener, you do your best to summarize the gist of what the person has said. Now, as the person who was talking, you listen to what the listener summarizes. And does it feel right? Does it feel like this person understood you or not? And so if the person understood you, you say, yeah, yeah. And if the person didn't, you say, well, there's something not quite there or something missing, and you clarify. And then the listener summarizes again. Okay. So the paradoxical thing here is that you might be disagreeing, but you're still agreeing all the time. Because let's say, even if it was a difficult conversation where, you know, person A is saying, well, I think that, and person B, you think the opposite, you still are going to, as person B, you're still going to summarize what the talker said, you know, without editorializing. You summarize it from their point of view, even though you might feel totally differently. What you're doing is not expressing yourself, but summarizing what you hear. And so the first person who was listening hears you and says, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. And so you have that rhythm of understanding and agreement. Okay. And then after the 10 or 15 minutes, whatever you have agreed are done, you shift and continue. Okay. So the only two little things I would add to my description is that before each partnership start, take a minute of pausing so that there is a sense of entering a new space. This is not ordinary conversation. So there's a little pause. Each person goes inside, connects inside, and then you start it. And then take another pause after the first person does it. Then you take a pause after the two of you have spoken and spend a little time, 5-10 minutes, could be just a few minutes, doesn't matter, just at least giving each other feedback on how it went. And so the feedback is important so that you're doing it in a way that works for both of you. So you have a possibility of adjusting. If it feels a little bit unclear, don't worry too much. Do it, practice it, keep going. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the role of the listener in this dyad of a talker and a listener. So again, you're continuing in practice to use active listening. And simply what we're doing now is introducing a little bit more of a sense of the emotional factors that shift that practice of active listening to something that is more emotional and actually gradually is becoming more and more focusing. Okay, so you don't need to worry about, am I doing focusing or not? Just continue doing active listening, but just incorporating some of what we're talking about. And so today we're going to focus especially on the listener role. And why is that? One is to help you be a better listener in the practice itself. And so, it takes two roles. And so obviously the role of the listener is important. But really, another key part is to say that part of what focusing is that it is helping you be a better listener of yourself. So, for instance, when you're the talker and you have a little moment of pausing and the listener is summarizing what you said, it gives you an opportunity to hear what you said, to hear it said a little bit differently. It's a summary as opposed to the whole thing, but to hear it. And when you hear it, as a listener, you go, yeah, this is what I said. Or, this is not quite what I said. Or, this is what I said, but now that I'm hearing it, actually, I would say it differently, or something else comes up. Okay? And so, very interesting of how being a listener of what you yourself are saying is very much part of what makes focusing something that is so powerful. Imagine that you're speaking and nobody listens to you, not even yourself. So this is a moment, what focusing is about, what makes its power, is it gives you a chance, not just to be heard by somebody else, but actually the experience of you being able to hear yourself. So when we're talking right now about the role of the listener, what's important for you to remember is it's not just about what's happening when you are functioning as a listener in a dyad, but is something that characterizes the experience of focusing as a focuser as well, not just as a listener. So now I'm stopping the metaphor of listening, like in listening to yourself, and specifically addressing what happens when you are in the listener role, in active listening, or in a focusing partnership. We're saying that being in the listener is really about being in service to the focuser or the person who's talking. So that means that you're not arguing, you're not talking about your point of view, you're playing back the gist of what they said in the way they meant it, not in the way that you would argue with it. Okay, so all of this is in service of the listener. In the service of the focuser. Okay, but does it mean that you, as the listener, need to turn off any feelings you have? No, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You're a human being. You're not a tape recorder. Okay, so the thing that is thrilling about it is that you stay a human being, and that's what makes the value of it. So at first, when you practice it, it may seem a little confusing or difficult. That sense of, oh, what are you talking about? How can I both pay attention to my feelings, but also playing back what they mean as opposed to what it means to me? Okay. So if it's difficult for you, that's great, just because it is difficult. So, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and say it's very easy, but it's a difficulty that's manageable. And actually, from managing the difficulty, from staying at the edge of it, comes a lot of growth. Because what happens then is it helps you separate. This is how I feel. This is what this person says. This is what this person means. I disagree with it, but I'm also able to play it back in the way that they understand it. So as you do that, there is a growth because you discover that there's more to you than simply having to say what you feel. You can contain it. And you can also be there. So as you do that, it's not just that the content is better, that you're able to play back what the other person says, but the very act of doing it, to know that there is a difference between how you feel and what the other person feels, is actually something that gives you the experience of containing, which means of being able to calm down the nervous system. Okay? And calming down the nervous system actually expands your capacity to understand yourself and others. So what I'm talking about here is that the role of listener, far from being passive, is actually a very active role. You're very much involved in it. And let's say you have strong feelings that come up. Remember that the structure of the partnership is such that you will have your turn to express them another time. Okay? So again, that sense of containing, it doesn't have to come out right away. I can hold it and I can still be present. I don't have to deny what it brings up for me, and I am present. Okay? And of course, all of us alternate. So we're both listener and focuser. And what you will notice over time is as you practice this attitude as a listener, you will see how it actually expands your capacity to be more in touch with yourself as a focuser or as a talker. Okay? So go for it and practice it. In this section, we're going a little bit more into the territory of what is focusing, and again, describing it in terms where you're not going into it and saying, oh, this is such new territory. I don't know anything about it. I have to learn all kinds of things. But actually, the way we're going about it is little by little to discover that all of these things are things you already know and do in some way. Okay, so we're already in session 4. we're progressing a little bit, and you're actually doing focusing whether you know it or not. And so what I'm going to be talking about now is paying a little bit more attention to the experience inside as you talk or as you listen, either as a listener or as the focuser listening to the summary that the listener is giving you back. Okay? And what happens inside when you slow down? What happens inside when you pause? So the very first thing I want to say is that it happens that people who don't, have never done this kind of stuff, some people say, oh, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And you would say, well, but 5 minutes ago you were talking and suddenly you had an idea. So what happened? You say, oh, well, I just had an idea. Okay. Now, if we had a camera, a video camera, recording you during these 5 minutes, what you would notice is that the aha moment where the idea comes about, there's little something, even very subtle things that happen in your body. It could be little twitches. It could be just like a little up thing. Like the aha moment is a moment of energy. Sometimes the energy is not kind of up. Sometimes the energy is more kind of down, settling. Like when, essentially you were troubled by something and and kind of the energy is coming down because it all makes sense. Okay. So if you feel that nothing's happening inside, trust me, things are happening. You're just not noticing them. And maybe this is the first thing that I'm inviting you to do is, as the listener, pay attention to the physicality of those aha moments, however small. As the focuser, you've paid attention to them in your focusing partner. Just try and pay attention to them as they are happening to you when you're the focuser. So beyond just noticing that something happens, all kinds of ways in which things can happen. So for many people, what happens is it's just like an idea comes up or a problem finds a solution. Okay, quick, done. And so you don't seem to have a physical sensation for it. So nothing wrong with that. Just take it. Okay, we're going to talk more another time about how to deepen that. But just simply notice that what happens to you when you have that pause, when you have that slowing down, when you have that listening, is that an idea pops up. Okay, and just kind of file it away. But there's other things that might be happening. And I'm going to give you some examples so that you can be on the lookout for them. Sometimes what might happen is a sense of emotion, like a sense of being startled, or a sense of being sad, or a sense of being happy. And again, this does not happen independently from physical experience. So just be prepared for some subtle variations of that to be there. Sometimes what happens is a physical experience, like a sense of tightening. Or something like, there's something in my stomach. Okay. Or it could be, okay. So all of these experiences are usually often very difficult to describe. We don't have words to totally match them or to even come close to them. And so, and it makes sense. These are pre-verbal experiences. This is something that's a lot of processing by our organism. So again, we're going to, in the future, pay more attention to them. But for the moment, simply noticing whether or not you have such experiences that are physical. Okay? It could be images that come up for you. It could be that other situations come up. So the purpose of this session is to invite you to pay attention to what happens when you slow down and pause, not just in terms of content, in terms of ideas, but in terms of physicality and the various ways in which it can manifest. And to start to have some curiosity and also some kind of appreciation for the way our organism function in generating these sensations, these images, these various ways of responding to life. So we continue our slow, organic way into understanding focusing from inside out and discovering how we already know how to do it. And it's just a question of encouraging those parts of us that already know how to do it to come more to the surface. In the last session, we talked about the various things we can experience when we slow down and pause. So now what we're going to do is stay a little longer with them, as I had already encouraged you to do, but not just stay longer with them, but kind of bring a little curiosity to them in order to allow for something possibly new to emerge. So let's say, for instance, that your experience when you slow down and pause is, oh, suddenly you have an idea, and the idea pops up just like in a cartoon where you have the mad scientist go takes a shower, and then the light bulb pops up, as if by magic, and the idea comes up. So now you're going to kind of replay that in your mind's eye. And so you can do it on your own, but you can very much do it in a conversation with your focusing partner to say, I'm remembering, that time when I was there, or just a few minutes ago, I had this insight, and I want to kind of slow down a little bit to try and remember what it was. And to a curiosity about, if I say there was no physicality to it, well, actually, can I really replay it? Imagine that maybe, if there's something coming up, if it's an idea coming up, where did this possibly happen in my body? Okay, so it doesn't mean you have to find something. The point there is not that there is a predefined answer that's a good answer and that you're a bad student if you don't find the experience. It's just engaging your curiosity into staying longer with the possibility that something might have happened. Now, if something happened physically, like for instance, you have this stuff in the stomach, okay? I'm inviting you to find words, gestures, something to explain it, understanding that it won't really be clear, okay? So we're not trying to be clear. The reason you're trying to find words is not so much to help your partner understand it. In fact, you don't really care about that. That's not the point of the exercise. The reason you're trying to find words for it is that the looking for words helps you understand better what's happening. So the words are not really going to match the experience, but it's the process of looking for the words that's going to help you get closer to the experience. So let's say, for instance, you just have something in the stomach. So you start with, well, there's something in the stomach, okay? And then you notice, for instance, like what I am doing right now is I'm moving my hand. And so, yeah, maybe my hand captures some of that something. And so I'm going to say, well, it's like there's something kind of rotating, churning, yeah, something like that. Okay. And you say it and you pause. And if you pause long enough, maybe your partner is going to repeat it. But even if your partner doesn't, you pause and there's a little inside question in your mind. Is it really like a rotating? And so maybe then it changes. It's like maybe, oh, well, it's like there's something and it's kind of pulsating, okay? And so if you feel it in your hands, just move your hands and use words, but something about kind of manifesting that sensation that's difficult to express into something that you're trying to get closer to through your images, through your hand gestures, through your words. Okay, so that's exploring this variation. And so exploring ideas, exploring sensations, exploring a felt sense, you know, anything that comes up, you stay longer and you really try to get more at the nitty gritty of it and express it. And when you have expressed it, you don't say, okay, good. So I've described it as something turning in my stomach, done, moving on. Okay. The whole point is actually you stay with that. No, not so fast. This is really a process of slowing down. And so you've gotten to, well, this kind of churning and stay with that. And what does it feel like when I describe it that way? And you notice how, am I doing this? I'm closing my eyes. And you might very well close your eyes when you ask yourself that, to be kind of going more inside. That's okay. You don't have to, but you might. Whatever helps you go into, hmm. And as you stay with it, you give a chance for something to emerge. And it could be that something emerges like an image, or it could be that something emerges like, oh, it reminds me of being on a merry-go-round, or whatever else happens, okay? And so something new has emerged. And so let's say, for instance, it reminds me of being on the merry-go-round, and you stay with that. And again, it's not the final answer. It's just it's something emerges there. It's like, and you stay with it. And you're a little curious about, okay, so yeah, that's these are thoughts. What's happening in my body? What's happening in my body? What's happening in my body? Ah, ah. Something comes up and you have another image or another thought or a body sense, okay? And so staying with that. So I know that I'm a bit vague until you've done it. It might seem like I'm not giving you very specific directions, and I'm not. So essentially, the one direction I'm inviting you to do is to stay with it, be curious, kind of pay attention to your body, and don't jump to conclusions, but really keep going. And this is something that the more you do, the more you will know the territory, and then you'll feel more comfortable and you'll get better at it. And you'll notice what gives you a sense of progress, a sense of more insights. And so you'll learn from doing it. So trust the process and keep doing it. A little footnote to these instructions. If you're the listener, you might feel the temptation to direct the focuser, like, oh, slow down, or have you thought about this, or do this, do that. And I think it's natural to all of us. We want to be helpful. And maybe it's not just about wanting to be helpful to the other person, but maybe that situation of, the other person kind of struggling raises our own fears. And so this is a moment as the listener to remind yourself that you're there to hold the space. So you breathe. You might do like I'm doing, just opening the arms as you're breathing, that sense of, um, embodying that sense of holding the space and that leaving room for the process to unfold. Some of you, or most of you, or all of you may be thinking, oh, I'm not sure really that I know at this point what focusing is. Well, trust me, if you follow this, you know a lot more than you think you do. Because essentially, you are recreating the conditions under which focusing naturally occurs. So it doesn't mean that you can't get better at it. And of course, you will get much, much, much better the more you practice. But you got somewhere that you got the foundations of it and a solid place from which to keep going. So how do you keep going from there? Well, the first step is really to take stock of what you have done and really have a sense of appreciation for what you have gotten out of this course in terms of focusing. And take a moment by yourself, in partnership, in the class, to express what it is that has changed in the way you approach it. The way you slow down, the way you pause, the way you're more able to notice somewhat subtle sensations in your body, the way you're able to kind of connect, the ideas with physicality. Anything that you notice, just own it. And this is a solid base from which to base future growth. What is helpful, and you will see as an addition to this course, is a page on what is traditionally referred to as the 6 steps of focusing. So when Jin Gentlin identified what he called focusing, he spent some time to analyze, to observe what was happening. And one natural ways we have to understand something is to deconstruct it into little parts. So for instance, if you have a car, you might want to pull it apart and rebuild it to really understand how it works. It might be a good way to do it. That's what people used to do when cars were a little bit less complicated. So in that sense, hearing about the 6 steps of focusing and notions such as, clearing a space, finding a felt sense, finding resonance, finding a handle, all of these things are a nice way to put names on the process. But things in real life don't happen as neatly as the reading of the 6 steps might, imply to you. In fact, I would not pay too much attention to it other than as a way of mapping or putting a name to some of the experiences you have when you have done focusing the way we're teaching you in this course. So you refer to the map if you want. You pay attention to what you have accomplished so far. I think it's very important to not just pay attention to progress or changes you have made in focusing itself, but remember at the beginning of the course, we invited you to pay attention to what you might want to change in your life. And so pay attention to in what ways, big or small, you have actually started to make changes in your life. And it could be something as simple as maybe being a little bit more deliberate, being a little more prone to slowing down a bit, taking little pauses in your life. It might be something about noticing some of your reactivity is a little bit different. It might be that you're seeing some possibilities of changes emerging where you didn't have any, okay? It could be that this is too small a time for noticing big changes. But just start with checking. what might have changed. And so from that place, imagine what might change if you give it enough time and attention. And so this gives you a goal to strive for. And to know that at the same time as you pursue these goals, these aspirations, it's not necessarily tangible goals. It can be a quality of life goal. It can be a sense of yourself goal. As you pursue these goals with the mindful practice of focusing as some kind of a GPS, some kind of a embodied intelligence that provides direction and gives you that sense of who you are moment by moment and where you are and helps you go there. The progressing in your understanding how to do focusing goes hand in hand with paying attention to how you lead your life. Essentially, that using focusing to guide your life gives you an incentive to practice focusing. Seeing changes in your life gives you an incentive to practice focusing. Practicing focusing as an inquiry into who you are and what you want to be and how you want to change your life makes it actually a fun, exciting, stimulating process, which does not mean it doesn't have its share of difficult, painful, or scary moments. But this is all part of the growth and all that you're building a container for.